the work that Frank is doing and the work that the Center for Security Policy does is absolutely pivotal. It's absolutely crucial. He is the really sole source provider of information and warnings to the American people. And I depend on him. I think everybody who speaks from a conservative point of view about this issue depends upon him. And thank the Lord there are people like you to help support him and sustain him in doing this. So please give him a lot of money. The more you give him, the louder that megaphone becomes, the louder the warning becomes. It's in the same category as feed your watchdog well. Because he is truly the watchdog that lets us understand the nature of the threat we face and flags the instances in which we need to become involved and we need to become active. This administration is pathetic. On domestic policy, at least you can oppose them. You can have contempt for the ideas, you can think they're wrong, and you can do battle with them. On foreign policy and national security, there's nothing to oppose, there's nothing to support. It's a policy characterized by apathy, distraction, passivity, appeasement, and basically sabotage. So that there's nothing to oppose. It doesn't exist. And I think increasingly we are learning that this is a presidency that will go down in history not for its radicalism, but for its weakness. And this is a president who is totally passive in the way he confronts policy. He literally sets up a commission or a congressional committee or his party's caucus and says, you guys govern and bring it by me and I'll ratify it. I think he has himself confused with Queen Elizabeth II. And by that I don't mean imperiousness, I mean passivity. I mean, I think that he reigns rather than rules. And I think he embodies the consensus of whoever is jerking his chain at the moment. And that used to be the Democratic caucus. We'll see who it is now. But this level of passivity is just unbelievable. Now, our enemies are not passive. Our enemies are quite active. And I believe that the metaphor that comes to my mind is that our national security, homeland security folks, FBI, CIA, are like the goalie on a heavily overmatched soccer team. And the team isn't good enough to stop the shots from coming in. And the goalie frantically is jumping all over the place to block each shot as it comes in. They want to blow up Times Square, and the goalie manages to knock it down. They want to blow up an airliner flying into Detroit, and the goalie manages to knock it down. Today they want to blow up a military recruiting station in Maryland, and the goalie manages a save. But at some point we're going to run out of saves, as we did in Fort Hood, and I believe that we are going to face a situation in which there will be a significant and important terror attack on the soil of the United States. And that will be a total game changer in the politics of this issue and the politics of this administration. Because it will come at the time when Obama is lending credence to the idea of his weakness. He's now facing a situation where he can fight with the Republicans in Congress and probably lose. Or he can surrender, preserve some of his dignity, and look weak. He has no other alternative. If he fights with the Republicans, he will lose, because in the last analysis, the issues can be defined in such a way that he can't possibly win. I'll explain a little more about that in a minute. And if he surrenders, he seems to be moving to the center, but like I said last night on TV, there's a big difference between moving to the center and fleeing to the center. And when people speak of this as a compromise, I say, yeah, just like that wonderful deal that got cut between Lee and Grant at Appomattox, or between Hirohito and MacArthur on the deck of the Missouri. That was one of them compromises. And this is not a compromise, this is not a deal, this is a surrender. And the more he surrenders, the more weak he is going to seem, the more out of control, the more inept. And if on top of that, we get hit with a major terrorist attack, or even a series of minor terrorist attacks. Look at what the Washington, D.C. sniper did by killing 12 people with sniper rifles. And for, 4 months, nobody was getting any gas in Washington. They were all scared to death of the sniper. Al-Qaeda can do that to us, and the terrorists can do that to us. And under Obama, they will. And I think that that will reinforce a notion of presidential weakness. Foreign policy and national security policy is the forum in which we judge presidential personality. We don't use domestic policy for that because it's too complicated and Congress is too involved in it and it's too multifaceted. But foreign policy is controlled by one guy, and it becomes the Rorschach test to learn about his personality. I was not heavily involved in the politics of Bosnia, but I was heavily involved in the image of Bill Clinton. And I went to him at one point in May of 96, and I said, you are just getting killed, 95, you are getting killed by these terror attacks in Bosnia. People are looking at you as a total wimp. They're thinking you're the weakest guy in the world. And I know the UN controls that trigger, but you got to take it away from them to show people that you have any starch. I didn't use the word starch. I used a plural noun. and I said, this is not just a question of saving tens of thousands of lives. It's a question of you're looking weak. And he stood up to them, he bombed the hell out of them, and solved the genocide. And I believe that Obama will flunk that personality test, because I think that we will learn when the terrorists attack us, just as when Jimmy Carter's diplomats got held hostage, that we have a president who's overwhelmed by the job and too weak really to pull it off. And it all stems from a total lack of priority to the war on terror, a complete lack of priority. Everything else is more important. Appeasing the Islamic population and the fundamentalist is more important, so we don't use the phrase war on terror. Protecting every possibly imagined constitutional right is more important, even though obviously, and how many times do you need to say, that we do not want to prosecute anyone using evidence that was not obtained under the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against search and seizure. What we do want is to get intelligence from that without observing the protections of the Fourth Amendment and use it to stop terrorist attacks. And of course, that leads to the obvious inference that you can't then bring them here for a civilian trial because the evidence is tainted. Because we didn't get the evidence in a way where they were read their Miranda rights and the Fourth Amendment and all of that. But he refuses to recognize this difference between intelligence gathering on the one hand and prosecution on the other. The whole notion of avoiding racial profiling is more important than fighting terror. Maintaining morale in the American Muslim community, and a sense of cohesion and a sense of not being persecuted. That's more important than fighting terror. Everything is more important. Everything gets in the way of it. Let me just give you a metaphor that I think explains how it works. I was talking to the governor of Alabama, just retired, Bob Riley, and he was talking about the oil spill. And he said when the oil spill started, he ran around the world and got every deep burn he could find, every 8 or 10 foot burn, not just on the boom, I think it is, not just on the surface, but that would go deep, that could keep the oil off the Alabama coast. And he got 164 miles of the only stuff that was made in the world. He bought up basically every large boom that was made on the planet and brought them there. Well, the Army Corps of Engineers said Louisiana needs it more, possibly because Carville protested, and the 164 miles got taken away and moved to the Louisiana shore. Then Riley said, okay, if I can't get a boom, what I'll do is get skimmers, and I'll go around skimming the oil off before it hits our shore. And then Fish and Wildlife came in and said, you're going to kill turtles, sea turtles, you can't do it. And then he said, well, if I can't skim it off out to sea, I'll wait till it washes on the beach and then I'll pick it up. And OSHA said, no, it's too hot. You can't make anyone work for more than 2 hours a day doing that. And you can't send them out there if the temperature is over 90 degrees, which it was all summer. So he wanted to fight the oil spill, Obama did, but everything else came first. And in the bureaucratic inertia that goes on in Washington, unless the president forces an issue to number one, the bureaucracy will take its normal course and kill any initiative and kill any change and kill any response. And you read the dynamics of how the FBI did not warn the Department of the Army about the Fort Hood killer, again, because of this process of bureaucratic inertia. And that really is what's gripped us in the entire area of homeland security. While this is happening, Iran is developing an atomic bomb. While this is happening, we have a stopwatch going on. I worked for Netanyahu when he was elected prime minister, and when he first met me and hired me, his first lines to Eileen and me were, "It's 1938. It's 1938. In the year there'll be the war, and in 2 years the camps, and in 3 years the final solution. It's 1938. And the United States is always 2 years late in doing what it needs to do. We're now finally getting around to enforcing tough sanctions in terms of energy and finance, stuff that Frank has been begging states and the federal government to do for 10 years. And finally now we're doing it. Bolton says it's too late and that only a military attack would work. And then we are turning a blind eye as Russia, which has promised not to sell the A-300 anti-aircraft system to Tehran, now is in fact doing it, but doing it in a way where they can deny that they're doing it. And if that system gets installed, it probably precludes the possibility of an Israeli air attack. And in the meantime, God help Israel if they build any settlements on the West Bank. Oh, but that was last month. Now they can build the settlements if they want, but they should go ahead and negotiate land for peace. And this whole big furor that went on for a year and a half about Israeli settlements and turned it upside down and the whole world went crazy over it, now the United States has dropped the position because finally somebody has realized that if you insist on that as your precondition, nothing else will happen. But eventually, obviously, Israel understands that you can't make peace with people that want war. The only way that we can get a deal going is if they don't hold an election on the West Bank. Because if they hold an election, Hamas is going to win, and there's not going to be a deal. So you have good cop, bad cop. You sign the deal with Hamas, with Abbas, and then Hamas wins the election and the bad cop's in charge. That's what happened to us in Gaza, and that's what would happen to us on the West Bank. And the drift that's going on in Afghanistan, the willful desire to ignore that Iraq exists, where we will still have 50,000 troops, this administration is just so passive. It has no policy, it has no action, it has nothing proactive, it doesn't solve anything, it doesn't succeed in doing anything, except perhaps understanding the extent to how Christina Kirchner can get along with her husband, a form of marriage counseling that we provided the Clinton family through our diplomatic corps. The situation with our economy, if I can digress into domestic policy and go through that a little bit. A year and a half ago, the economists told us economists told us 2 months ago that a year and a half ago the recession ended. It ended in June of 2009. So you all having a good time? You all doing okay? But you know, they were right. The cyclical boom and bust ended a year and a half ago. The rest of the world came out of it. In the last quarter, Europe had a 4.6% growth rate in the Eurozone. We had a 1.7% growth rate. So Europe came out of it, but the United States never did. But we're not in the boom and bust cycle. That's run its course. We know that prices got inflated. There was the mortgage bubble, the real estate bubble, and the bubble burst, and stuff fell down, and then it went back up again. And that sort of false dawn that we all felt in January through April of 2010, before it became clear that there was no recovery. That false dawn was really the rest of the world recovering from the recession. What we face now is not cyclical. What we face now is the new normal. This is what it's going to be for 10 years. This is what the decade of the 2010s is going to be. 10% unemployment, negative growth or less than 2% growth, at some point in a few years, rampant inflation. This is going to be the new normal, because it is the response that always happens when a government imposes the policies that the Democrats in Congress and Obama have imposed on the country. We'll have permanent 10% inflation because Europe has for 2 decades. We'll have subnormal growth rates because Europe had them for 2 decades. We'll have the same sclerosis that has gripped Europe will now grip the United States because it's the same policies taking effect. When Barack Obama became president, state, local, and federal spending accounted for 35% of our GDP. Now it is 45%. We spend a higher percentage of our economy through the government than Britain or Germany do. And we're very close to France, 1 point below, and we're closing in on Sweden. And the same sclerosis, the same total absence of growth exists when you do that. You can't have a free market economy with an elephant that size in your living room. I don't mean an elephant, I mean a jackass. Because you can't have a free market economy like that. I interrupt this to tell you a lovely story about Winston Churchill. True story. He, as you know, he lost power right after World War II. And Clement Attlee came in with the Labour government and socialized and nationalized everything. And Churchill was the leader of the opposition, still in Parliament. So one day he was in the men's room at the House of Commons, and he's standing at a urinal, and Clement Attlee walks in the door, and Churchill scooches down 3 urinals. And Attlee says, "Shy, Winston?" And Churchill says, "No, it is not that at all. It is just that whenever you see anything that is big and impressive, you nationalize it." The reason our economy is not recovering is that we are facing a reign of terror akin to Robespierre and Danton and Marat, a reign of terror over our economy. Consumers aren't spending because they're worried about tax increases. And now the Bush tax cuts will be extended, but who knows what the deficit commission taxes are going to do? Who knows if those are going to pass? Are we going to increase FICA taxes by 50%, Social Security? Are we going to decrease the home mortgage deduction by 2/3 and charitable contribution deductions by 2/3 and state and local tax deductions by 2/3? Are we going to do that? Are those tax increases going to kick in? Will Obama abandon the idea of the VAT or a millionaire surcharge or raising the rates back up again? How can a consumer spend when the stimulus is like a hog being fed at the Chicago stockyards? You know, have another bite. Tomorrow we're going to sell you by the pound because of the tax increases we're being fattened up for. Old people who own their own businesses are afraid to invest in growing that business because they're afraid that if they die, their heirs are now going to have to come up with 35% of the cash value of the property, or the thing gets sold at fire sale prices. So they deliberately keep their money liquid, not doing any good, because they're worried about that. The medical industry, 16% of our economy. Who in their right mind is going to create a job in healthcare when you don't know what the government's going to disallow next year in its reimbursement rates when the new rates come out? Manufacturing, 11% of our economy. Who would be crazy enough to expand their manufacturing plant when EPA is about to impose administratively what Congress didn't do with cap and trade? This is cap, no trade. So the only reason American manufacturing has been very competitive, and it has been, it's still #1 in the world. We still produce 1/4 of the world's manufactured goods, the same ratio we did in 1980 and 1990 and 2000. China's caught up, but we're still well ahead of China. Why? Because we've automated. When I worked for Clinton, we produced 50% more products and employed 50% fewer people. And that's because we use energy instead of manpower. And if you're going to tax energy, you're going to eliminate that competitive offset, and the businesses will be forced offshore. Energy, which is another 7% of our economy, what are you going to invest in? Offshore, where there is a moratorium, there isn't, there's regulation, there isn't. Shale drilling, which will probably be banned by Obama because 160 feet up, it might endanger the water supply, it might not, but we don't know. Coal, which we're going to tax, oil, which we're going to tax. What are you going to invest in? Windmills? And then the banking sector, the financial sector, 21% of the economy. I support all of the financial regs about Wall Street. I think they're fine. Collateral for derivatives and all that stuff. But the real heel, the boot heel of this bill is being felt in community and neighborhood banks all over the country, which provide 2/3 of the loans to small business, which in turn provide 80% of the new jobs in the United States. These community banks, 1 out of 10 of them have either been taken over in the last year and a half or are on the FDIC's hit list. And they literally are going in and saying, don't you make any loan to anybody that has any risk to it at all. Because if you do, I'll move in, I'll take over your bank, I'll fire you, I'll fire the board, I'll get rid of your staff, I'll wipe out the shareholder equity, which includes your pension, and I'll sell your bank into a larger bank involuntarily. And with that kind of stuff, who's going to lend money to the 2 kids in a garage who have a great idea to change the world? And none of that lending is going on. So there is this total reign of terror that has frozen the entire economy. But it is not caused by a cycle. It's caused by the actions of one man. And what was made by one man can be undone by the hand of man. And that's what the Republican Congress is going to do over the next 2 years. and here's how we're going to do it. We basically won the Senate as well as the House. It doesn't look that way because the Democrats still keep the corner offices. But we have 4 terrified senators who are absolutely scared to death who run in 2012. Webb of Virginia, Manchin of West Virginia, Nelson of Nebraska, and Lieberman of Connecticut. And those 4 folks are voting like Republicans. They voted to extend the Bush tax cuts on rich people and the whole bit. And there are about 5 others that want to sign up and join them who are scared about their re-election chances. McCaskill from Missouri, Stabenow from Michigan, Cole from Wisconsin, Conrad from North Dakota, Casey from Pennsylvania. The line is forming around the block. There are 13 Democratic incumbents who I think we can beat for the Senate in 2012. And they were all desperate not to get caught voting against conservative stuff because they'll have to eat it in the campaign. So they're saying, hey, I'll vote for this stuff. Let Obama veto it. Why should I stand between him and a bullet? You know, I'll vote yes. Let him veto it. They can't override the veto. It's free for me. So what's going to happen is a gigantic confrontation between the Congress, both houses, and the president, initially over the debt limit, then over state bailouts, and then finally over the budget. So what's going to happen is that when Obama comes to Congress in March or April and says we're running out of money, we have to raise the debt ceiling, the Republicans are going to attach rescissions from the budget to cut about $100 billion of discretionary spending from government spending, which is part of a long-term plan to roll discretionary spending back to the pre-Obama levels of 2008 and freeze it there for 3 years. That by itself cuts the deficit in half after 3 years and brings it down to the levels it was under Reagan, 3.5% or 4.5% of the economy. Basically, at that point, no big deal. The president is going to have to go along with those cuts. He'll have no choice because we literally won't give him a higher debt ceiling, and the government has to close down at that point. Then a week or 2 later, or 3 or 4 weeks later, the states come to the Congress begging for additional money, like addicts at the methadone clinic. They're here for this morning's fix. And they were able to balance their budgets only with about 15% of their budget from one-shot federal revenues. And now they'll come back and be begging for more. The Republicans are going to say, no, we're not giving you a dime. At which point the bond markets will close down those states. If any of you have money in munis, get it the hell out. And in about 4 months, 5 months, the bond market is going to basically refuse California, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, and Illinois access. And when that happens, the states will come back to Congress and say, in 3 weeks, our schools close and our prisons open. You have got to give us money. And at that point, the Republicans are going to do something really cool. They/we, because I'm working closely with them, will change the federal bankruptcy law to permit states to go bankrupt. Right now, only municipalities can. Now states will, if they abrogate their public employee union contracts. Goodbye SEIU, goodbye AFSCME, goodbye AFT, goodbye NEA, and goodbye Democratic Party. And we won't impose this on them. They can feel free to raise taxes if they want, or cut spending if they want, or do whatever they want to do to repair. But if they want our help, that's what they got to do. And that will absolutely destroy the whole basis of the union control of our governments. Then what's going to happen is in September and October and November, we're going to send him a budget with no tax increases, a path to balance, and significant cuts in spending. Not in Social Security or Medicare. We're not stupid. Not in those two, but in everything else. And then we're going to load everything into that budget. We're going to load in defunding Obamacare. And what defunding means is it means the language of the Boland Amendment on Central America. It shall be unlawful, punishable by $100,000 or 5 years in prison to use any money allocated in this appropriations bill to the IRS to enforce the individual mandate or the employer mandate to buy health insurance, or to this budget to HHS to collect the data requisite for rationing, or to this budget to HHS to collect the information necessary for Medicare cuts. Defund it, block it. We'll also make it illegal for the EPA to spend any of this money imposing carbon limitations on carbon dioxide. Also, we will include in the budget a ban on earmarking, and we'll pass an earmark-free budget whether the Senate likes it or not. And you won't believe this, the NLRB is fixing to impose card check administratively. They are now reviewing, the Dana decision that says you need a secret ballot. Eric, I forget his last name, Conrad, I think, who is the head of the NLRB, former chief counsel to SEIU, is now asked for comments on November 1st, day before Election Day, to review the Dana decision. That review is going to rule that that you can't have a secret ballot in a union election. The card check will suffice. We will defund that and prohibit money from being used for it. And there's somebody here, I forget her name, who talked to me about the FCC and the community rating, and there are community boards, which we warn about and fleeced, and they're now taking effect. We'll defund that one too. And then we're going to sit there, and Obama will glare at us, and we'll glare back at him, and the government will shut down, and we'll go through 95 and 96 already. But this time, first of all, I'll be playing on your team. And secondly, we've already established that this guy's a chicken. He blinked. So that's the future according to me. And at some point, we'll probably be hit again with another attack. At some point, he will probably begin to withdraw from Afghanistan because the left will make him do it. And he is going to look very, very, very weak. And then in 2012, we get the hell rid of him. Be happy to take questions from you. I'll repeat it.
Sharia into our Constitution. Can you give us a foresight of what we will look like as Americans?
Well, I am thrilled that Frank and David, God forgive me, Urashoma, thank you, have taken the lead in alerting the country to what's going on. I'm particularly thrilled that David's lawsuit, where he's challenging AIG setting up a Sharia-compliant fund on the grounds that that's an action favoring a religion and violates separation of church and state, has survived the motion to dismiss. And he tells me there's a ruling expected any day. This is an insidious thing. There is a constant effort in the US and the UK and Canada to bring Sharia law into legitimacy, first to govern the Muslim population and eventually to govern all of us. And one of the great vehicles for that is the opening by the US Supreme Court to consider other legal precedents from other countries in making decisions about our Constitution. It is wrong to see this as a means to an end. It is the end itself. Terrorism is a means to this end. They blow things up and hijack planes and knock down buildings to get us to adopt Sharia law. And we need to be very, very mindful and very, very alert to all of these issues and all of these problems. It requires great vigilance. One of the problems is that virtually every major bank in the world has now created a Sharia-compliant fund, which basically puts these radical imams in charge of deciding investments at the moment for over $1 trillion of capital. And if they ever marry up with the sovereign wealth funds, $3 or $4 or $5 trillion of capital. And that really is the threat that we face. It's an enormous threat and just needs to be at the core of what is discussed in the coming presidential race.
Will Hillary run and will be a Republican challenger?
Hillary, if she's still breathing, will seriously consider running. But we all know that her sense of loyalty and integrity will preclude a candidacy. But in the event she overcomes those scruples, the way it would work is that the Democratic Party gets furious at Obama's concessions and surrenders to the Republican. Their rage at the Bush tax cuts being extended on the wealthy is a good example, a foretaste of what they're going to do. They're going to go completely crazy. And Russ Feingold or Dennis Kucinich or someone of that ilk will probably jump in and challenge Obama to primary fights. And the polling will proceed and move on, and all of those groups and Acorn and those folks will back him and will work on moving that candidacy forward. And at some point, he's going to move to 10 and 15 and 20 and 25 and 30 and 35% of the polls. And when he passes the boiling point, Hillary may get into the race, just like Bobby Kennedy did when McCarthy did that in 1968. So I think that Obama faces a choice. It's what I alluded to earlier. He can stand fast, fight the Republicans, battle them, get defeated, and give in or get trounced. Or he can compromise with them, in which case he buys himself a primary fight. The only reason Clinton was able to move to the center without buying a primary fight is that Jesse Jackson back then controlled the left, because it was basically a racially based left. And his price for no primary fight was that we leave affirmative action alone. And that was the only fight I lost in the administration to Stephanopoulos, not to change affirmative action. I wanted to make it gender and racially neutral, just base it on poverty or residence in a poor neighborhood. But Obama will not have that protection, and yes, I think he will have a primary, and I think there's a significant chance Hillary gets into it. Now, in terms of the Republican nominating field, the one candidate I'm opposed to is Mitt Romney, because of Romney Care in Massachusetts. I believe it's an absolute given that we have to repeal the Obama health care law, and I don't think a guy that signed the bill in Massachusetts can be trusted to do that, even though Romney has never been one to stand on his previous convictions. But I do not regard his opportunism in a sufficiently positive light to trust him to reverse this one. That leaves three candidates who we all like, we all know, and we all wonder if they can win. Palin, Huckabee, and Gingrich. And they all carry their own separate form of baggage, in some cases fairly, in other cases unfairly. And we all look at that baggage and wonder if they can win. And the current conclusion of most Republican voters is that they can't. Even though we know them and like them, they only get about 16, 16, and 13, respectively, in the Republican primary field. So where's the other 80%? They're saying that these folks can't win because of the baggage. And that leaves an understudy cast that's a very large and very fertile group. It includes Thune, who I find a little stiff for my taste, but we'll see. Pawlenty, who was a good governor in Minnesota. I'm still researching whether he did something in connection with Sharia law on home mortgages. I'm right in the middle of talking to his people about it. Mitch Daniels is tremendously creative in what he's doing in Indiana on school choice and on health savings accounts. Mike Pence is a really articulate guy who really could be the great speech maker in this class and could be very effective. Rick Santorum, former senator from Pennsylvania, a solid conservative and could be a good candidate. DeMint, the senator from South Carolina, who stuck his neck out and intervened in primaries for conservatives. Chris Christie, who has actually done something and stopped that harbor tunnel that would have killed us. The governor of Virginia, McDonnell, who has rolled spending back to 06 levels in Virginia with no tax increases. Jindal, governor of Louisiana, excellent record in dealing with the oil spill. Barber, I don't like, governor of Mississippi, too much of an old-style lobbyist. Perry in Texas, governor, I don't know much about him. Michelle Bachmann, a very appealing candidate from Minnesota with tremendous verve and energy and maybe somewhat more solidly grounded in information than other candidates might be. And a guy who doesn't hold public office at all, Herman Cain, former member of the Federal Reserve Board from Kansas City and a real gripping orator, a black guy, really terrific. So, I mean, you have a really a live cast of candidates, and it'll be like American Idol. We'll watch them on TV and see who we like.
You just made the argument for why the primaries are important. None of these people that you've named right now, first of all, they violate the basic premise that I put it out there. Stop running for president on the American people. All right? Everybody's
Well, they can't stop because Iowa's January.
But my point is, they're all running, and the American people are feedback going, hey, you know, we're sick of you running, burn it first. The unknown person is the person that comes out of the primaries, which tells us what the country will bear.
Yeah.
Yes or no?
I think it's going to be a little different. I think that rather than Iowa and New Hampshire imposing their view on America, America will impose its view on Iowa and New Hampshire. Because the primaries, the contests among these 20 people, is going to be fully televised over Fox News. And 2/3 of the Republicans and 1/2 of the independents watch Fox several times a week or more. A third watch it every night. And you're going to get to know these folks really well, just as well as the people in Iowa will. And I think the national polling at that point will mean a great deal. And I think that in effect there'll be a national primary in 2011. But you're right, this is going to be while we're fighting these fights in Congress. And that's going to be an interesting thing, but we have to do them together. One more, okay? Yep.
What are your thoughts on the DREAM Act?
I think that first of all, the DREAM Act, which says that if you were brought here illegally as a child and you went to school, high school at least, in the United States, you may, and I believe there's an academic threshold, you may then become a citizen or stay here legally, I forget which.
Go to college or go to the military.
Yeah, okay, go to college or...
It's really easy if they're illegal.
Okay, or go to the military. But, and I think that the sole purpose of putting that in is to get the Republicans to kill it so they alienate the Hispanics a little bit more. That's the goal of the Senate leadership. I don't believe it's going to pass, although I haven't seen a whip count on it. But I think that the whole sole purpose of it is to try to embarrass the Republicans. And and it works. Kerry beat Bush by only 10 points among Latinos. But in 2008, Obama beat McCain by 45 points among Latinos. And in this last election, the Democrats won them by 25 points. Big reason the Democrats won some of those Senate seats at the end was the Hispanic vote coming back over immigration. We can't afford to keep losing these fights. I don't believe we should have the DREAM Act, but I believe that we have to take this problem by its horns and solve it. And I think the way to solve it is dry up the jobs. You don't need to deport 10 million people. You don't even need a 400-foot high wall. You just need to have no jobs on the other side. Now, Obama has striven mightily to accomplish this objective by increasing our unemployment up to 10%, and that is, in fact, the only successful policy of his administration. He's cut illegal immigration in half by the recession. But the more permanent remedy would be to create really serious criminal penalties for hiring illegal immigrants, like jail, and serious jail time for that, and at the same time have a national ID card, so that you don't have to drag Latinos down to the station house to give them lie detector tests. You can just whip out a card like you do a driver's license and show that you're here legally. And then have a Brasiero guest worker program with minimum wage paid on the books, health insurance as part of the deal, and then send them home when the crop's picked, or when the gardening's done, or when the assembly line is finished. And that'll send everybody home, because there are no jobs here. Dry up the jobs and they all go home. Both these parties are hypocritical. The Republicans want illegal immigrants to work but not vote. And Democrats, controlled by the unions, want them to vote but not work. Okay, thank you.
I should break one of these out, and it's just so you see the beautiful thing.
This will be very useful, these pens, because my wife maintains that I've never bought a pen in my life. She said Dick thinks it comes with the house.
This one comes with our
Yes,
house.
thank
you for being
Thank
in
you.
it. Great work. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to terminate. I hope that you have happy holidays. Thanks for your thoughts about the Center for Security Policy, the work we do at the end of the year. God bless you all.